Greetings, everyone. Spooky voice today. Hello and welcome to Chilliteracy. Happy Wednesday. I finally am actually here. And I finally put the spooky overlay on. I know Sam did it last week, or the week before, or whenever it was. But anyway, spooky overlay is on. It's officially spooky season. Although I've been reading spooky stories for the last few streams. But you know, hello everybody. Got the decorations up, exactly. The cobwebs are paid actors. How are we all doing? I hope we are well. I haven't done a stream for a couple of weeks. I don't even know. Should have the massive Home Depot skeleton. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wasn't here last week. Don't think I was here the week before either. I haven't been here for 3 weeks. I do apologise, chat. I was travelling, then cold, then travelling. And guess what, everyone? Next week, I'm also travelling. Actually, no, next week I might be back. Yes, I think next week I will be back. I will be able to stream next week, hopefully. It is a travel day, but I think I will be back in time. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But yes. How are we all doing? Greetings, all you lovely people. I see lots of names in chat. Who have we got? We've got everyone. We've got Arian. We've got Lady Mistopheles, Smallcog, Queck. We've got Andy Pence, Queek the Geek, Kiwi. Hello. Anyone? Sam, obviously. And Wallstrike. Hello. It's a better premise than next week I will have a cold. Yes, I will endeavour not to have a cold next week. But again, you know, trains and planes and not automobiles this time, but, you know, being around other people might mean I do have one. I hope not. But I shall endeavour not to get one. But yes, it is officially spooky season. I mean, it has been for kind of 3 weeks, but, you know, we endeavour to... The spooky season for us kind of lasts up until Christmas. And then we sort of go back to it for a little bit as well, you know. So, yeah, spooky. The true horror, other people. Yes, indeed. I bought, as I said on our Monday, it's always spooky season in our hearts, exactly. There are a huge array of spooky stories, and we do love a good spooky tale. So, as I said on Monday, I may or may not have bought yet another British Library Tales of the Weird collection. This happens to Sam and I occasionally. Yeah, they're a bit like, they're like our catnip, basically. We see a British Library Tales of the Weird book in the wild and we go, ooh, I don't have that one. So yes, we've got more spooky tales. And we've got 2 tonight, one of which I genuinely laughed out loud at. It's given me a little bit Canterbury Tales. What am I on about? Canterville Ghost. Wow, brain. Canterville Ghost vibes. So excuse me. And the yawns have begun. The Canterbury Ghost, exactly. By Chaucer / Wilde. But yes, we'll do that one first. Canterville Ghost, yes, it's good. We actually do have a recording of me reading the Canterville Ghost last year, I think. Should be on YouTube somewhere on our archive. Banging story, love it. But yes, this one is very similar in vibe. Could always revisit that sometime. We could. I kind of want to like find if there's a play version of it somewhere. Because I have seen it as a play many years ago when I was a kid. So part of me wants to, you know, do some kind of like work out if it can be done as an audio play. Oh. Excuse me, because that could be quite fun. But they have stories we like and art that is good. This is very true. They do. There are currently on this particular one. There are, I think it's a well that is full of skulls. Is the picture on the front of this, yeah, tis a vibe. So yeah. Have I got anything else to talk about or say? I don't know, really. My brain is currently running on fumes. I have a lot going on at the moment, and I have many different hats to be wearing and many different things to be thinking about. So it's quite nice to just, chill with a couple of stories. Hopefully these ones will take us to time. They might not, but I can't really do 3 of these ones because they're a bit of an annoying length in that they will take longer than one of our streams to do 3. But my voice it doesn't feel 100% happy, and I've been doing lots of recording today for my choir. So yeah, I don't want to do a really long stream anyway, so we shall see how it goes. You're only here. Did you manage to do enough makeup to not look like you're early for Halloween? Erin, you're going to build a well of folly tomorrow. Ooh, fun. In your garden? I mean, it doesn't surprise me as something that you might do, but nice. But yes, I have pinned the text for our first tale up at the top of chat. And I guess if we are all sitting comfortably, then I guess we shall begin. I shall just move my mic because for some reason I've put it in an awkward place today. Hang on. There we go. Right. Are we ready for some... Frankly, this is just a straight up murder, but kind of funny? Question mark? So yeah, if we're all sitting comfortably, if we're all feeling suitably spooky, then we shall begin with The Wraith of Barnjum by F. Anstey. I frankly admit, whatever may be the consequences of doing so, that I was not fond of Barnjum. In fact, I detested him. Everything that fellow said and did jarred upon me to an absolutely indescribable extent, although I did not discover for some time that he regarded me with a strange and unreasonable aversion. We were so essentially unlike in almost every particular. I, with my innate refinement and high culture, my over-fastidious exclusiveness in the choice of associates, and he, a big, red, coarse brute with neither sweetness nor light, who knew himself a Philistine and seemed to like it. We were so unlike that I often asked him, with a genuine desire for information, what had I in common with him? And yet it will scarcely be believed, perhaps, that with such good reasons for keeping apart, we were continually seeking one another's company with a zest that knew no satiety. The only explanation I can offer for such a phenomenon is that our mutual antipathy had become so much a part of ourselves that we could not let it perish for lack of nourishment. Perhaps we were not conscious of this at the time, and when we agreed to go on a walking tour together in North Wales, I think it was chiefly because we knew that we could devise no surer means of annoying one another. But, however that may be, in an ill-starred day for my own peace of mind, we started upon a journey from which but one of us was fated to return. I pass by the painful experiences of the first few days of that unhappy tour. I will say nothing of Barnjum's grovelling animalism, of his consummate selfishness, his more than bucolic indifference to the charms of nature, nor even of the mean and sordid way in which he contrived to let me in for railway tickets and hotel bills. I wish to tell my melancholy story with perfect impartiality, and I am sure that I am not reduced to exciting any prejudice to secure the sympathies of all readers. I shall pass, then, to the memorable day when my disgust, so long pent up, so imperfectly concealed, culminated in one grand outburst of a not ignoble indignation, to the hour when I summoned up moral courage to sever the bonds which linked us so unequally. I remember it so well, that brilliant morning in June when we left the Temperance Hotel, Doldwyddan, and scaled in sulky silence the craggy heights of Cadair Idris, which, I presume, still overhang that picturesque village, while, as we ascended, an ever-changing and ever-improving panorama unrolled itself before my delighted eyes. The air up there was keen and bracing, and I recollect that I could not repress an aesthetic shudder at the crude and primitive tone which Barnjum's nose had assumed under atmospheric influences. I mentioned this, for we still maintained the outward forms of friendship, when he retorted, with the brutal personality which formed so strong an ingredient of his character, that if I could only see myself in that suit of mine, and that hat, referring to the dress I was then wearing, I should feel the propriety of letting his nose alone. To which I replied, with a sarcasm that I feel now was a little too crushing, that I had every intention of doing so, as it was quite painful enough to merely contemplate such a spectacle, and he, evidently meaning to be offensive, remarked that no one could help his nose getting red, but that any man in my position could at least dress like a gentleman. I took no notice of this insult. A bunting — I don't think I mentioned before that my name is Philibert Bunting — a bunting can afford to pass such insinuations by. Indeed, I find it actually cheaper to do so, and I flattered myself that my dress was distinguished by a sort of studied looseness that would appeal at once to a cultivated and artistic eye, though, of course, Barnjum's hard and shallow organs could not be expected to appreciate it. I overlooked it, then, and presently we found ourselves skirting the edge of a huge chasm whose steep sides sloped sheer down into the slate-blue waters of the lake below. How can I hope to give an idea of the magnificent view which met our eyes as we stood there? A view of which, as far as I am aware, no description has ever yet been attempted. To our right towered the peaks of Dolgelly, with their saw-like outline cutting the blue sky with a faint grating sound, while the shreds of white cloud lay below in drifts. At our feet were the sunlit waters of the lake, upon which danced a fleet of brown-sailed herring-boats. Beyond was the plain of Capel Curig, and there, over on the left, sparkled the falls of Idid. As I took all this in, I felt a longing to say something worthy of the occasion. Being possessed of a considerable fund of carefully dried and selected humour, I frequently amuse myself by a species of intellectual exercise, which consists in so framing a remark that a word or more therein may bear two entirely opposite constructions, and some of the quaint names of the vicinity seemed to me just then admirably adapted for this purpose. I was about to gauge my dull-witted companion's capacity by some such test, when he forestalled me. "You ought to live up here, Bunting," said he. "You were made for this identical old mountain." I was not displeased, for, Londoner as I am, I have the nerve and steadiness of a practised mountaineer. "Perhaps I was," I said good-humouredly. "But how did you find it out?" "I'll tell you," he replied with one of his odious grins. "This is Cadair Idris, ain't it? Well, and you're a cad awry dressed, ain't you? Cadair Idris, see?" He was dastard enough to explain. "That's how I get at it." He must have been laboriously leading up to that for the last 10 minutes. I solemnly declare that it was not the personal outrage that roused me, I simply felt that a paltry verbal quibble of that description, emitted amidst such scenery and that at that altitude, required a protest in the name of indignant nature, and I protested accordingly, although with an impetuosity which I afterwards regretted, and of which I cannot even now entirely approve. He happened to be standing on the brink of an abyss, and had just turned his back upon me, as, with a vigorous thrust of my right foot, I launched him into the blue ether, with the chuckle at his unhallowed jest still hovering upon his lips. I am aware that by such an act I took a liberty which, under ordinary circumstances, even the licence of a lifelong friendship would scarcely have justified, but I thought it only due to myself to let him see plainly that I desired our acquaintanceship to cease from that instant, and Barnjum was the kind of man upon whom a more delicate hint would have been distinctly thrown away. So I'm trying not to laugh. I watched his progress with some interest as he rebounded from point to point during his descent. I waited, punctiliously perhaps, until the echoes he had aroused had died away on the breeze, and then, slowly and thoughtfully, I retraced my steps, and left a spot which was already becoming associated for me with memories the reverse of pleasure. I took the next up train, and before I reached town had succeeded in dismissing the incident from my mind, or, if I thought of it at all, it was only to indulge relief at the reflection that I had shaken off Barnjum for ever. But when I had paid my cab and was taking out my latchkey, a curious thing happened. The driver called me back. "Beg pardon, sir," he said hoarsely, "but I think you've been and left something white in my cab." I turned and looked in. There, grinning at me from the interior of the hansom, over the folding doors, was the Wraith of Barnjum. I had presence of mind enough to thank the man for his honesty and go upstairs to my rooms with as little noise as possible. Barnjum's ghost, as I expected, followed me in, and sat down coolly before the fire, in my armchair, thus giving me an opportunity of subjecting the apparition to a thorough examination. It was quite the conventional ghost, filmy, transparent, and, though wanting firmness in outline, a really passable likeness of Barnjum. Before I retired to rest, I had thrown both my boots and the contents of my bookcase completely through the thing, without appearing to cause it more than a temporary inconvenience, which convinced me that it was indeed a being from another world. Its choice of garments struck me even then as decidedly unusual. I am not narrow, I cheerfully allow that, assuming the necessity for apparitions at all, it is well that they should be clothed in robes of some kind, but Barnjum's ghost delighted in a combination of costume which set the fitness of things at defiance. It wore that evening, for instance, to the best of my recollection, striped pantaloons, a surplice, and an immense cocked hat. But on subsequent occasions its changes of costume were so rapid and eccentric that I ceased to pay much attention to them, and could only explain them on the supposition that somewhere in space there exists a supernatural store in the nature of theatrical wardrobe, and that Barnjum's ghost had the run of it. I had not been in very long before my landlady came up to see if I wanted anything, and of course as soon as she came in, she saw the wraith. At first she objected to it very strongly, declaring that she would not have any such nasty things in her house, and if I wanted to keep ghosts, I had better go somewhere else. But I pacified her at last by representing that it would give her no extra trouble, and that I was only taking care of it for a friend. When she had gone, however, I sat up till late, thinking calmly over my position, and the complications which might be expected to ensue from it. It would be very easy to harrow the reader's feelings and work upon his sympathies here by a telling description of my terror and my guilty confusion at the unforeseen consequences of what I had done. But I think, in relating an experience of this kind, the straightforward way is always the best, and I do not care to heighten the effect by attributing to myself a variety of sensations which I do not remember to have actually felt at the time. My first impression had not unnaturally been that the spectre was merely the product of overwrought nerves or indigestion, but it seemed improbable that a cabman should be plagued by a morbid activity of imagination, and that a landlady's digestion could be delicate sufficiently to evolve a thing so far removed from the merely commonplace, and, reluctantly enough, I was forced to the conclusion that it was a real ghost, and would probably continue to haunt me to the end of my days. Of course, I was disgusted by this exhibition of petty revenge and low malice on the part of Barnjum, which might be tolerated perhaps in a Christmas annual with a full-page illustration, but which, in real life and at the height of summer, was a glaring anachronism. Still, it was of no use to repine then. I resolved to look at the thing in a common-sense light. I told myself that I had made my ghost and would have to live with it. And, after all, I had much to be thankful for. Barnjum in the spirit was a decided improvement upon Barnjum in the flesh, and as the spirit did not appear to be gifted with speech, it was unlikely to tell tales. Luckily for me, too, Barnjum was absolutely unknown about town. His only relative was an aunt resident at Camberwell, and so there was no danger of any suspicion being excited by chance recognition in the circles to which I belonged. It would have been folly to shut one's eyes to the fact that it might require considerable nerve to re-enter society closely attended by an obscure and fancifully attired apparition. Society would sneer considerably at first and make remarks, but I was full of tact and knowledge of the world, and I knew, too, that men have overcome far more formidable obstacles to social success than any against which I should be called upon to contend. And so, instead of weakly giving way to unreasonable panic, I took the more manly course of determining to live it down, with what success I shall have presently to show. When I went out after breakfast the next morning, Barnjum's ghost insisted upon coming too, and followed me, to my intense annoyance, all down St. James's Street. In fact, for many weeks it was almost constantly by my side, and rendered me the innocent victim of mingled curiosity and aversion. I thought it best to affect to be unaware of the presence of anything of a ghostly nature, and when taxed with it, ascribed it to the diseased fancy of my interlocutor. But by and by, as the whole town began to ring with the story, I found it impossible to pretend ignorance any longer. So I gave out that it was an artfully contrived piece of spectral mechanism, of which I was the inventor, and for which I contemplated taking out a patent, and this would have earned for me a high reputation in the scientific world if Messrs. Maskelyne and Cook had not grown envious of my fame, declaring that they had long since anticipated the secret of my machine, and could manufacture one in every way superior to it, which they presently did. Then I was obliged to confide in the strictest secrecy to two members of the peerage, both persons of irreproachable breeding, with whom I was at that time exceedingly intimate, that it was indeed a bona fide apparition, and that I rather liked such things about me. I cannot explain how it happened, but in a very short time the story had gone the round of the clubs and drawing-rooms, and I found myself launched as a lion of the largest size, if it is strictly correct to speak of launching a lion. I received invitations everywhere, on the tacit understanding that I was to bring my ghost, and the Wraith of Barnjum, as some who read this may remember, was to be seen at all the best houses in town for the remainder of the season, while in the following autumn I was asked down for the shooting by several wealthy parvenus, with a secret hope, unless I am greatly mistaken, that the ghost might conceive the idea of remaining with them permanently, thereby imparting to their brand new palaces the necessary flavour of legend and mystery. But of course it never did. To tell the truth, whatever novelty there was about it soon wore off. Too soon, in fact, for, fickle as society is, I have no hesitation in asserting that we ought to have lasted it at least a second season, if only Barnjum's ghost had not persisted in making itself so ridiculously cheap that, in little more than a fortnight, society was as sick of it as I was myself. And then the inconveniences which attached to my situation began to assert themselves more and more emphatically. I began to stay at home sometimes in the evening, when I observed that the phantom had an unpleasant trick of illuminating itself at the approach of darkness with a bilious green light, which, as it was not nearly strong enough to enable me to dispense with a reading lamp, merely served to depress me. And then it began to absent itself occasionally for days together, and though at first I was rather glad not to see so much of it, I grew uneasy at last. I was always fancying that the Psychical Society, who are credited with understanding the proper treatment of spectres in health and disease, from the tomb upwards, might have got hold of it and be teaching it to talk and compromise me. I heard afterwards that one of their most prominent members did happen to come across it, but with a scepticism which I cannot but think was somewhat wanting in discernment, rejected it as a palpable imposition. I had to leave the rooms where I had been so comfortable, for my landlady complained that the street was blocked up by a mob of the lowest description from 7 till 12 every evening, and she really could not put up with it any longer. On inquiry, I found that this was owing to Barnjum's ghost getting out upon the roof almost every night after dark, and playing the fool among the chimney-pots, causing me, as its apparent owner, to be indicted 5 times for committing a common nuisance by obstructing the thoroughfare, and once for collecting an unlawful assembly. I spent all my spare cash in fines. I believe there were portraits of us both in the Illustrated Police News, but the distinction implied in this was more than outweighed by the fact that Barnjum's wraith was slowly but surely undermining both my fortune and my reputation. It followed me one day to one of the underground railway stations, and would get into a compartment with me, which led to a lawsuit that made a 9-day sensation in the legal world. I need only mention the celebrated case of the Metropolitan District Railway versus Bunting, in which the important principle was once and for all laid down that a railway company, by the terms of its contract, is entitled to refuse to carry ghosts, spectres, or any other supernatural baggage, and can moreover exact a heavy penalty from passengers who infringe its bylaws in this respect. This was, of course, a decision against me, and carried heavy costs which my private fortune was just sufficient to meet. But Barnjum's ghost was bent upon alienating me from society also, for, at one of the best dances of the season, at a house where I had with infinite pains just succeeded in establishing a precarious footing, that miserable phantom disgraced me forever by executing a shadowy but decidedly objectionable species of can-can between the dances. Feeling indirectly responsible for its behaviour, I apologised profusely to my hostess, but the affair found its way into the society journals, and she never either forgave or recognised me again. Shortly after that, the committee of my club, one of the most exclusive in London, invited me to resign, intimating that, by introducing an acquaintance of questionable antecedents and disreputable exterior into the smoking room, I had abused the privileges of membership. I had been afraid of this when I saw it following me into the building, arrayed in Highland costume and a tall hat, but I was quite unable to drive it away. Up to that time I had been at the bar, where I was doing pretty well, but now no respectable firm of solicitors would employ a man who had such an unprofessional thing as a phantom about his chambers. I threw up my practice, and had no sooner changed my last sovereign than I was summoned for keeping a ghost without a licence. Some men, no doubt, would have given up there and then in despair, but I am made of sterner stuff, and besides, an idea had already occurred to me of turning the table upon my shadowy persecutor. Barnjum's ghost had ruined me. Why should I not endeavour to turn an honest penny out of Barnjum's ghost? It was genuine, as I well knew. It was, in some respects, original. It was eminently calculated to delight the young and instruct the old. There was even a moral or two to be got out of it, and though it had long failed to attract in town, I saw no reason why it should not make a great hit in the provinces. I borrowed the necessary funds, and had soon made all preliminary arrangements for running the Wraith of Barnjum on a short tour in the provinces, deciding to open at Tenby in South Wales. I took every precaution, travelling by night and keeping within doors all day, lest the shade, which was deplorably destitute of the commonest professional pride, should get about and exhibit itself beforehand for nothing. And so successful was I, that when it first burst upon a Welsh audience from the platform of the Assembly Rooms Tenby, no ghost could have wished for a more enthusiastic reception, and, for the first and last time, I felt positively proud of it. But the applause gradually subsided, and was succeeded by an awkward pause. It had not struck me till that moment that it would be necessary to do or say anything in particular during the exhibition, beyond showing the spectators round the phantom, and making the customary assurance that there was no deception and no concealed machinery, which I could do with a clear conscience. But a terrible conviction struck me as I stood there bowing repeatedly, that the audience had come prepared for a comic duologue with incidental music and dances. This was quite out of the question, even supposing that Barnjum's ghost would have helped me to entertain them, which perhaps I could scarcely expect. As it was, it did nothing at all, except grimace at the audience and make an idiotic fool of itself and me, an exhibition of which they soon wearied. I am perfectly certain that an ordinary magic lantern would have made a far deeper impression upon them. Whether the wraith managed in some covert way, when my attention was diverted, to insult the national prejudices of that sensitive and hot-blooded nation, I cannot say. All I know is that after sitting still for some time, they suddenly rose as one man. Chairs were hurled at me through the ghost, and the stage was completely wrecked before the audience could be induced to go away. It was all over. I was hopelessly ruined now. My weak fancy that even a spectre would have some remnants of common decency and good feeling hanging about it had put the finishing touch to my misfortunes. I paid for the smashed platform and windows with the money that had been taken at the doors, and then I travelled back to London, 3rd class, that night, with the feeling that everything was against me. It was Christmas, and I was sitting gloomily in my shabby Bloomsbury lodgings, watching with a miserable, apathetic interest Barnum's wraith as, clad in a Roman toga, top boots and a turban, it flitted about the horsehair furniture. I was wondering if they would admit me into any workhouse while the spectre continued my attendant. I was utterly and completely wretched, And now, for the first time, I really repented my conduct in having parted with Barnjum so abruptly by the bleak cliffside that bright June morning. I had heard no more of him. I knew he must have reached the bottom after his fall, because I heard the splash he made. But no tidings had come of the discovery of his body. The lake kept its dark secret well. If I could only hope that this insidious shade, now that it had hounded me down to poverty, would consider this as a sufficient expiation of my error and go away and leave me in peace. But I felt only too keenly that it was one of those one-idea'd apparitions, which never know when they have had enough of a good thing. It would be sure to stay and see the very last of me. All at once there came a sharp tap at my door, and another figure strode solemnly in. This, too, wore the semblance of Barnjum, but was cast in a more substantial mould, and possessed the power of speech, as I gathered from its addressing me instantly as a cowardly villain. I started back, and stood behind an armchair, facing those two forms, the shadow and the solid, with a feeling of sick despair. "Listen to me," I said. "Both of you. So long as your original proprietor was content with a single wraith, I put up with it. I did not enjoy myself, but I endured it. But a brace of apparitions is really carrying the thing too far. It's more than any one man's fair allowance, and I won't stand it. I defy the pair of you. I will find means to escape you. I will leave the world. Other people can be ghosts as well as you. It's not a monopoly. If you don't go directly, I shall blow my brains out." There was no firearm of any description in the house, but I was too excited for perfect accuracy. "Blow your brains out by all means," said the solid figure. "I don't know what all this nonsense you're talking is about. I'm not a ghost that I'm aware of. I'm alive, no thanks to you. And come back to the point, scoundrel." "Barnjum? And alive?" I cried, almost with relief. "If that is so," I added, feeling that I had been imposed upon in a very unworthy and ungentlemanly manner, "will you have the goodness to tell me what right you have to this ridiculous apparition here?" He did not seem to have noticed it particularly till then. "Hello," he said, looking at it with some curiosity. "What do you call that thing?" "I call it a beastly nuisance," I said. "Ever since I last saw you, it's been following me about everywhere in a very annoying manner." Will it be believed that the unfeeling brute only chuckled at this? "I don't know anything about it," he said. "But all I can say is it serves you jolly well right, and I hope it will go on annoying you." "This is ungenerous," I said, determined to appeal to any better feelings he might have. "We did not part on the best of terms, perhaps." "Considering that you kicked me over a precipice when I wasn't looking," he retorted brutally, "we may take that as admitted." "But, at all events," I argued, "it is ridiculous to cherish an old grudge all this time. You must see the absurdity of it yourself." "No, I don't," he said. I determined to make a last effort to move him. "It is Christmas Eve, Barnjum," I said earnestly. "Christmas Eve. Think of it. At this hour, thousands of throbbing human hearts are speeding the cheap but genial Christmas card to such of their relations as they consider at all likely to respond with a turkey. The costermonger, imaginative for the nonce, is investing damaged evergreens with a purely fictitious value, and the cheery publican is sending the member of his village goose club back to his cottage home, rich in the possession of a shot-distended bird and a bottle of poisonous port. Hear my appeal. If I was hasty with you, I have been punished. That detestable thing on the hearthrug there has dogged my path to misery and ruin. You cannot be without some responsibility for its conduct. I ask you now, as a man, nay, as an individual, to call it off. You can do it well enough if only you choose. You know you can. But Barnjum wouldn't. He only looked at his own wraith with a grim satisfaction as it capered in an imbecile fashion upon the rug. "Do," I implored him. "I would do it for you, Barnjum. I've had it about me for 6 months, and I am so sick of it." Still he hesitated. Some waits outside were playing one of those pathetic American melodies. I forget now whether it was Silver Threads Among the Gold or In the Sweet By and By, but at all events they struck some sympathetic chord in Barnjum's rough bosom, for his face began to twitch, and presently he burst unexpectedly into tears. "You don't deserve it," he said between his sobs, "but be it so." Then, turning to the ghost, he added, "Here, you, what's your name? Avaunt! D'ye hear? Hook it!" It wavered for an instant, and then, to my joy, it suddenly gave all over, and, shrivelling up into a sort of cobweb, was drawn by the draught into the fireplace, and carried up the chimney, and I never saw it again. Barnjum's escape was very simple. He had fallen upon one of the herring boats in the lake, and the heap of freshly caught fish lying on the deck had merely broken his fall instead of his neck. As soon as he had recovered from the effects, he was called away from the country upon urgent business, and found himself unable to return for months. But to this day, the appearance of the wraith is a mystery to me. If Barnjum had been the kind of man to be an esoteric Buddhist, it might be accounted for as an astral shape. But esoteric Buddhism requires an exemplary character and years of abstract meditation, both of which conditions were far beyond Barnjum's attainment. Esoteric, sorry. The shape may have been one of those subtle emanations which we are told some people are constantly shedding, like the coats of an onion, and which certain conditions of the atmosphere and the extreme activity of Barnjum's mind under sudden excitement possibly contributed to materialise in this particular instance. Or perhaps it was merely a caprice of one of those vagrant poltergeists or supernatural buffoons, which took upon itself very officiously the duty of avenging my behaviour to Barnjum. Upon one point I am clear. The whole of this system of deliberate persecution being undertaken directly on Barnjum's account, he is morally and legally bound to reimburse me for the heavy expense and damage which have resulted therefrom. Hitherto, I have been unable to impress Barnjum with this principle, and so my wrongs are still without redress. I may be asked why I do not make them the basis of an action at law, but persons of any refinement will understand my reluctance to resort to legal proceeding against one with whom I have at least lived on a footing of friendship. I would fain persuade, and shrink from appealing to force, and besides, I have not succeeded as yet in persuading any solicitor, even a shady one, to take up my case. The end. So that is now officially my favourite ghost story. He just killed him! He just killed him for a bad pun! You just murdered a man! Because you didn't like what he said about... God! I just love the idea of actually... this is absolutely what would happen if someone actually had a ghost. I love the fact that everybody can see the ghost, and obviously capitalism gets involved. I just think it's such a good take. It's such a good take. How dare he come back from the death. I know. I mean, he definitely, it was, I watched him as he bounced off the cliffs. I was like, no, he's very dead. He's very dead. It's like the most light-hearted murder I think I've ever read. It's just so good. I also just punch the mic. I also and I feel like if Sam was listening, he will also like this phrase: the being possessed of a considerable fund of carefully dried and selected humour. I just love that. That is such a good phrase. Carefully dried and selected humour. Like that is top notch. Maybe one as a ghost and one as a zombie. Maybe. That is good, right? Yeah. But I just love the... I thought it only due to myself to let him see plainly that I desired our acquaintanceship to cease from that instant, and Barnjum was the kind of man upon whom a more delicate hint would have been distinctly thrown away. I just love the fact it's just like, it's not like any other way I could say I don't want to be friends with you. It's not gonna get through to him. So what do? I'm gonna kill him. It's like it's not really a hint, my dude. The 1,000 injuries of this fucking guy I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon puns, I vowed revenge. Exactly. It's so good. So I'm gonna have to read more of F. Anstey, because he was like, he just got mad that the guy made a pun before he could do it himself. Yeah, absolutely. And then goes, I wasn't personally offended. It wasn't because I was annoyed that he got there before me. It wasn't that. It was because I thought it was low brow, even though he was trying to make a pun himself. He just couldn't think about it. And then he was like, he must have been thinking about that for like the last 10 minutes. Yeah, like you weren't, my guy. Like, it is a beautiful story of hypocrisy. I love it. So, yeah, that was an excellent story, and I'm going to have to read more of this author because, yeah, beautiful writing. It feels a bit Woodhouse and a bit wild, which I'm always a big fan of. Oh, excuse me. But yeah, it's just the fact that he bounces. The fact that he needs to describe that. I watch his... sorry, I'm just going to keep reading bits now. I watched his progress with some interest as he rebounded from point to point during his descent. It's just like watching him with interest. Boing. But he's so dead. This guy's an absolute monster. Moral of the story, don't murder people. The consequences might be unpleasant. Yeah, exactly. And I like the being fined for keeping a ghost without a license. It's just so good. Oh, dear. So yes, I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. It was quite hard to actually not like burst out laughing halfway through that, because it's so funny. It's so good. And the fact that he's not even slightly sorry that he tried to murder this guy. He's like, actually, no, he owes me. He massively owes me the inconvenience that his ghost, that wasn't his ghost, oh my God. It's beautiful. I love it. So yeah. Moral of the story, don't murder people. And ghosts are confusing things, I guess. Yeah. Eating while listening to something is funny was interesting. Yes, I was quite careful not to drink too much water during that, because I might have done a spit take myself. It's just, yeah, so well written, so good. Ugh, brilliant. Suing a guy for haunting is S tier Karening. Yes, this guy's absolutely he's a Karen. Completely. Yeah. Anyway, I shall throw you all to a break. Go do break-related things. And I shall see you back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. return. Welcome back. Spooky, spooky. I hope we've had a good break. I have just chuckled to myself and got myself some more water. That was a good tale. I very much enjoyed that. And it's from a collection of his stuff as well I saw on Project Gutenberg, so I'm going to have to delve into that, methinks. Yeah, the funniest, frankly, murder story I think I've ever read. But we're going to go on to something a little bit less silly. For the next one, we're back on our boy Algernon Blackwood, of the wonderful name and excellent writing. One we haven't read, actually, given that we've read a lot of his stuff now. I also didn't realise he spent time as a dairy farmer in Canada, apparently, and even had spells as an artist model and violin teacher. He's could have done everything then. Interesting. Seems like a cool guy. And he was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. I have no idea what that is, but something occult. Rosicrucianism? No idea what that is. Anyway. Have we read, if Sam's here, we've read The Willows, we've read Ancient Lights. Have we read The Man Whom the Trees Loved? Have you read that one? I feel like I'd recognise the title, but I don't know if we've read that one. Some Da Vinci Code-ish. Yeah, absolutely. That is a I assume that is a no that Sam has replied to me, not on Twitch, but through message. Okay, we haven't read that one then. Good. Sorry, got very confused. I was like, hang on, where have I got that message from? Ah, okay. That's one we probably should read then. Because it sounds like The Man Whom the Trees Loved could be nice and, not nice, but also it's Blackwood, and it's probably less nice. The trees probably love him for bad reasons, and they're probably going to absorb him or something. I don't know, no idea. But anyway, speaking of trees, this all Sam's voice floating from the ether, exactly. What was I going to say? Yes, this stream will finish early, accidentally. Did not realise that previous one was as short as it was. Probably because it was so funny. But that's fine. We'll have a little bit of a shorter stream tonight. But yes, if we are all sitting comfortably, then on the subject of trees, we shall begin the next story for tonight, and the final story for tonight. I can stop yawning. I'm very sorry. Right. The Wood of the Dead by Algernon Blackwood. One summer, in my wanderings with a knapsack, I was at luncheon in the room of a wayside inn in the western country, when the door opened and there entered an old rustic, who crossed close to my end of the table and sat himself down very quietly in the seat by the bow window. We exchanged glances, or, properly speaking, nods, for at the moment I did not actually raise my eyes to his face, so concerned was I with the important business of satisfying an appetite gained by tramping 12 miles over a difficult country. The fine, warm rain of 7 o'clock, which had since risen in a kind of luminous mist about the tree-tops, now floated far overhead in a deep blue sky, and the day was settling down into a blaze of golden light. It was one of those days peculiar to Somerset and North Devon, when the orchards shine and the meadows seem to add a radiance of their own, so brilliantly soft are the colourings of grass and foliage. The innkeeper's daughter, a little maiden with a simple country loveliness, presently entered with a foaming pewter mug, inquired after my welfare, and went out again. Apparently she had not noticed the old man sitting in the settle by the bow window, nor had he, for his part, so much as once turned his head in our direction. Under ordinary circumstances I should probably have given no thought to this other occupant of the room, but the fact that it was supposed to be reserved for my private use, and the singular thing that he sat looking aimlessly out of the window with no attempt to engage me in conversation, drew my eyes more than once somewhat curiously upon him, and I soon caught myself wondering why he sat there so silently and always with averted head. He was, I saw, a rather bent old man in rustic dress, and the skin of his face was wrinkled like that of an apple. Corduroy trousers were caught up with a string below the knee, and he wore a sort of brown fustian jacket that was very much faded. His thin hand rested upon a stoutish stick. He wore no hat and carried none, and I noticed that his head, covered with silvery hair, was finely shaped and gave the impression of something noble. Though rather piqued by his studied disregard of my presence, I came to the conclusion that he probably had something to do with the little hostel and had a perfect right to use this room with freedom, and I finished my luncheon without breaking the silence, and then took the settle opposite to smoke a pipe before going on my way. Through the open window came the scents of the blossoming fruit trees. The orchard was drenched in sunshine, and the branches danced lazily in the breeze. The grass below fairly shone with white and yellow daisies, and the red roses climbing in profusion over the casement mingled their perfume with the sweetly penetrating odour of the sea. It was a place to dawdle in, to lie and dream away our whole afternoon, watching the sleepy butterflies and listening to the chorus of birds which seemed to fill every corner of the sky. Indeed, I was already debating in my mind whether to linger and enjoy it all instead of taking the strenuous pathway over the hills, when the old rustic in the settle opposite suddenly turned his face towards me for the first time and began to speak. His voice had a quiet, dreamy note in it that was quite in harmony with the day and the scene, but it sounded far away, I thought, almost as though it came to me from outside where the shadows were weaving their eternal tissue of dreams upon the garden floor. Moreover, there was no trace in it of the rough quality one might naturally have expected, and, now that I saw the full face of the speaker for the first time, I noted with something like a start that the deep, gentle eyes seemed far more in keeping with the timbre of the voice than with the rough and very countrified appearance of the clothes and manner. His voice set pleasant waves of sound in motion towards me, and the actual words, if I remember rightly, were, "You are a stranger in these parts?" Or, "Is not this part of the country strange to you?" There was no "sir," nor any outward and visible sign of the deference usually paid by real country folk to the town-bred visitor, but in its place a gentleness, almost a sweetness, of polite sympathy that was far more of a compliment than either. I answered that I was wandering on foot through a part of the country that was wholly new to me, and that I was surprised not to find a place of such idyllic loveliness marked upon my map. "I have lived here all my life," he said with a sigh, "and am never tired of coming back to it again." "Then you no longer live in the immediate neighbourhood?" "I have moved," he answered briefly, adding after a pause in which his eyes seemed to wander wistfully to the wealth of blossoms beyond the window, "But I am almost sorry, for nowhere else have I found the sunshine lies so warmly, the flowers smell so sweetly, or the winds and streams make such tender music." His voice died away into a thin stream of sound that lost itself in the rustle of the rose leaves climbing in at the window, for he turned his head away from me as he spoke and looked out into the garden. But it was impossible to conceal my surprise, and I raised my eyes in frank astonishment on hearing so poetic an utterance from such a figure of a man, though at the same time realizing that it was not in the least inappropriate, and that, in fact, no other sort of expression could have properly been expected from him. "I am sure you are right," I answered at length, when it was clear he had ceased speaking, "for there is something of enchantment here, of real fairy-like enchantment, that makes me think of the visions of childhood days, before one knew anything of... I had been oddly drawn into his vein of speech, some inner force compelling me. But here the spell passed, and I could not catch the thoughts that had a moment before opened a long vista before my inner vision. "To tell you the truth," I concluded lamely, "the place fascinates me, and I am in two minds about going further." Even at this stage I remember thinking it odd that I should be talking like this with a stranger whom I met in a country inn, for it has always been one of my failings that to strangers my manner is brief to surliness. It was as though we were figures meeting in a dream, speaking without sound, obeying laws not operative in the everyday working world, and about to play with a new scale of space and time, perhaps. But my astonishment passed quickly into an entirely different feeling when I became aware that the old man opposite had turned his head from the window again, and was regarding me with eyes so bright they seemed almost to shine with an inner flame. His gaze was fixed upon my face with an intense ardour, and his whole manner had suddenly become alert and concentrated. There was something about him I now felt for the first time that made little thrills of excitement run up and down my back. I met his look squarely, but with an inward tremor. "Stay then, a little while longer," he said in a much lower and deeper voice than before. "Stay, and I will teach you something of the purpose of my coming." He stopped abruptly. I was conscious of a decided shiver. "You have a special purpose, then, in coming back?" I asked, hardly knowing what I was saying. "To call away someone," he went on in the same thrilling voice. "Someone who is not quite ready to come, but who is needed elsewhere for a worthier purpose." There was a sadness in his manner that mystified me more than ever. "You mean—" I began, with an unaccountable access of trembling. "I have come for someone who must soon move, even as I have moved." He looked me through and through with a dreadfully piercing gaze, but I met his eyes with a full straight stare, trembling though I was, and I was aware that something stirred within me that had never stirred before, though for the life of me I could not have put a name to it, or have analysed its nature. Something lifted and rolled away. For one single second I understood clearly that the past and the future exist actually side by side in one immense present, that it was I who moved to and fro among shifting protean appearances. The old man dropped his eyes from my face, and the momentary glimpse of a mightier universe passed utterly away. Reason regained its sway over a dull, limited kingdom. "Come tonight," I heard the old man say. "Come to me tonight into the wood of the dead. Come at midnight." Involuntarily I clutched the arm of the settle for support, for I then felt that I was speaking with someone who knew more of the real things that are and will be than I could ever know while in the body, working through the ordinary channels of sense. And this curious half-promise of a partial lifting of the veil had its undeniable effect upon me. The breeze from the sea had died away outside, and the blossoms were still. A yellow butterfly floated lazily past the window. The song of the birds hushed. I smelt the sea. I smelt the perfume of heated summer air rising from fields and flowers, the ineffable sense of June and of the long days of the year. And with it, from countless green meadows beyond, came the hum of myriad summer life, children's voices, sweet pipings, and the sound of water falling. I knew myself to be on the threshold of a new order of experience, of an ecstasy. Something drew me forth with a sense of inexpressible yearning towards the being of this strange old man in the window seat, and for a moment I knew what it was to taste a mighty and wonderful sensation, and to touch the highest pinnacle of joy I have ever known. It lasted for less than a second, and was gone. But in that brief instant of time, the same terrible lucidity came to me that had already shown me how the past and future exist in the present, and I realized and understood that pleasure and pain are one and the same force, for the joy I had just experienced included also all the pain I had ever felt, or ever could feel. The sunshine grew to a dazzling radiance, faded, passed away. The shadows paused in their dance upon the grass, deepened a moment, and then melted into air. The flowers of the fruit trees laughed with their little silvery laughter as the wind sighed over their radiant eyes the old, old tale of its impersonal love. Once or twice a voice called my name. A wonderful sensation of lightness and power began to steal over me. Suddenly the door opened and the innkeeper's daughter came in. By all ordinary standards, hers was a charming country loveliness, born of the stars and wildflowers, of moonlight shining through autumn mists upon the river and the fields. Yet, by contrast with the higher order of beauty I had just momentarily been in touch with, she seemed almost ugly. How dull her eyes, how thin her voice, how vapid her smile, and insipid her whole presentiment. For a moment she stood between me and the occupant of the window seat while I counted out the small change for my meal and for her services, but when, an instant later, she moved aside, I saw that the settle was empty, and that there was no longer anyone in the room but our two selves. This discovery was no shock to me. Indeed, I had almost expected it. And the man had gone just as a figure goes out of a dream, causing no surprise, and leaving me as part and parcel of the same dream without breaking of continuity. But as soon as I had paid my bill and thus resumed in a very practical fashion the thread of my normal consciousness, I turned to the girl and asked her if she knew the old man who had been sitting in the window seat, and what he had meant by the wood of the dead. The maiden started visibly, glancing quickly round the empty room, but answering simply that she had seen no one. I described him in great detail, and then, as the description grew clearer, she turned a little pale under her pretty sunburn, and said very gravely that it must have been the ghost. Ghost? What ghost? Oh, the village ghost, she said quietly, coming closer to my chair with a little nervous movement of genuine alarm, and adding in a lower voice, "He comes before a death, they say." It was not difficult to induce the girl to talk, and the story she told me, shorn of the superstition that had obviously gathered with the years round the memory of a strangely picturesque figure, was an interesting and peculiar one. The inn, she said, was originally a farmhouse, occupied by a yeoman farmer, evidently of a superior, if rather eccentric, character, who had been very poor until he reached an old age, when a son died suddenly in the colonies and left him an unexpected amount of money, almost a fortune. The old man thereupon altered no whit his simple manner of living, but devoted his income entirely to the improvements of the village and to the assistance of its inhabitants. He did this quite regardless of his personal likes and dislikes, as if one and all were absolutely alike to him, objects of a genuine and impersonal benevolence. People had always been a little afraid of the man, not understanding his eccentricities, but the simple force of this love for humanity changed all that in a very short space of time, and before he died he came to be known as the father of the village, and was held in great love and veneration by all. A short time before his end, however, he began to act queerly. He spent his money just as usefully and wisely, but the shock of sudden wealth after a life of poverty, people said, had unsettled his mind. He claimed to see things that others did not see, to hear voices and to have visions. Evidently he was not of the harmless, foolish, visionary order, but a man of character and of great personal force, for the people had became divided in their opinions, and the vicar, good man, regarded and treated him as a special case. For many, his name and atmosphere became charged almost with a spiritual influence that was not of the best. People quoted texts about him, kept when possible out of his way, and avoided his house after dark. None understood him, but though the majority loved him, an element of dread and mystery became associated with his name, chiefly owing to the ignorant gossip of the few. A grove of pine trees behind the farm. The girl pointed them out to me on the slope of the hill. He said was the wood of the dead, because just before anyone died in the village he saw them walk into that wood, singing. None who went in ever came out again. He often mentioned the names to his wife, who usually published them to all the inhabitants within an hour of her husband's confidence, and it was found that the people he had seen enter the wood died. On warm summer nights he would sometimes take an old stick and wander out, hatless, under the pines, for he loved this wood, and used to say he met all his old friends there, and would one day walk in there never to return. His wife tried to break him gently of this habit, but he always had his own way, and once, when she followed and found him standing under a great pine in the thickest portion of the grove, talking earnestly to someone she could not see, he turned and rebuked her very gently, but in such a way that she never repeated the experiment, saying, "You should never interrupt me, Mary, when I am talking with the others, for they teach me, remember, wonderful things, and I must learn all I can before I go to join them." This story went like wildfire through the village, increasing with every repetition, until at length everyone was able to give an accurate description of the great veiled figures the woman declared she had seen moving among the trees where her husband stood. The innocent pine grove now became positively haunted, and the title of Wood of the Dead clung naturally as if it had been applied to it in the ordinary course of events by the compilers of the Ordnance Survey. On the evening of his 90th birthday, the old man went up to his wife and kissed her. His manner was loving and very gentle, and there was something about him besides, she declared afterwards, that made her slightly in awe of him and feel that he was almost more of a spirit than a man. He kissed her tenderly on both cheeks, but his eyes seemed to look right through her as he spoke. "Dearest wife," he said, "I am saying good-bye to you, for I am now going into the wood of the dead, and I shall not return. Do not follow me, or send to search, but be ready soon to come upon the same journey yourself." The good woman burst into tears and tried to hold him, but he easily slipped from her hands, and she was afraid to follow him. Slowly she saw him cross the field in the sunshine, and then enter the cool shadows of the grove, where he disappeared from her sight. That same night, much later, she woke to find him lying peacefully by her side in bed, with one arm stretched out towards her, dead. Her story was half believed, half doubted at the time, but in a very few years afterwards it evidently came to be accepted by all the countryside. A funeral service was held to which the people flocked in great numbers, and everyone approved of the sentiment which led the widow to add the words, "the father of the village," after the usual texts which appeared upon the stone over his grave. This, then, was the story I pieced together of the village ghost, as the little innkeeper's daughter told it to me that afternoon in the parlour of the inn. "But you're not the first to say you've seen him," the girl concluded, "and your description is just what we've always heard, and that window, they say, was just where he used to sit and think when he was alive, and sometimes, they say, to cry for hours together." "And would you feel afraid if you had seen him?" I asked, for the girl seemed strangely moved and interested in the whole story. "I think so," she answered timidly. "Surely if he spoke to me." "He did speak to you, didn't he, sir?" she asked after a slight pause. "He said he had come for someone." "Come for someone?" she repeated. "Did he say—" she went on falteringly. "No, he did not say for whom," I said quickly, noticing the sudden shadow on her face and the tremulous voice. "Are you really sure, sir?" "Oh, quite sure," I answered cheerfully. "I did not even ask him." The girl looked at me steadily for nearly a whole minute, as though there were many things she wished to tell me or to ask. But she said nothing, and presently picked up her tray from the table and walked slowly out of the room. Instead of keeping to my original purpose and pushing on to the next village over the hills, I ordered a room to be prepared for me at the inn, and that afternoon I spent wandering about the fields and lying under the fruit trees, watching the white clouds sailing out over the sea. The wood of the dead I surveyed from a distance, but in the village I visited the stone erected to the memory of the father of the village, who was thus evidently no mythical personage, and saw also the monuments of his fine, unselfish spirit, the schoolhouse he built, the library, the home for the aged poor, and the tiny hospital. That night, as the clock in the church tower was striking 11:30, I stealthily left the inn and crept through the dark orchard and over the hayfield in the direction of the hill whose southern slope was clothed with the wood of the dead. A genuine interest impelled me to the adventure, but I also was obliged to confess to a certain sinking in my heart as I stumbled along over the field in the darkness, for I was approaching what might prove to be the birthplace of a real country myth, and a spot already lifted by the imaginative thoughts of a considerable number of people into the region of the haunted and ill-omened. The inn lay below me, and all round it the village clustered in a soft black shadow unrelieved by a single light. The night was moonless, yet distinctly luminous, for the stars crowded the sky. The silence of deep slumber was everywhere, so still, indeed, that every time my foot kicked against a stone I thought the sound must be heard below in the village and waken the sleepers. I climbed the hill slowly, thinking chiefly of the strange story of the noble old man who had seized the opportunity to do good to his fellows the moment it came his way, and wondering why the causes that operate ceaselessly behind human life did not always select such admirable instruments. Once or twice a night bird circled swiftly over my head, but the bats had long since gone to rest, and there was no other sign of life stirring. Then, suddenly, with a singular thrill of emotion, I saw the first trees of the Wood of the Dead rise in front of me in a high black wall. Their crests stood up like giant spears against the starry sky, and though there was no perceptible movement of the air on my cheek, I heard a faint rushing sound among their branches as the night breeze passed to and fro over their countless little needles. A remote, hushed murmur rose overhead and died away again almost immediately. For in these trees the wind seems to be never absolutely at rest, and on the calmest day there is always a sort of whispering music among their branches. For a moment I hesitated on the edge of this dark wood, and listened intently. Delicate perfumes of earth and bark stole out to meet me. Impenetrable darkness faced me. Only the consciousness that I was obeying an order strangely given, and including a mighty privilege, enabled me to find the courage to go forward and step in boldly under the trees. Instantly the shadows closed in upon me, and something came forward to meet me from the centre of the darkness. It would be easy enough to meet my imagination halfway with fact and say that a cold hand grasped my own and led me by invisible paths into the unknown depths of the grove, but at any rate, without stumbling, and always with the positive knowledge that I was going straight towards the desired object, I pressed on confidently and securely into the wood. So dark was it that, at first, not a single starbeam pierced the roof of branches overhead, and, as we moved forward side by side, the trees shifted silently past us in long lines, row upon row, squadron upon squadron, like the units of a vast, soundless army. And, at length, we came to a comparatively open space where the trees halted upon us for a while, and, looking up, I saw the white river of the sky beginning to yield to the influence of a new light that now seemed spreading swiftly across the heavens. "It is the dawn coming," said the voice at my side that I certainly recognized, but which seemed almost like a whispering from the trees. "And we are now in the heart of the Wood of the Dead." We seated ourselves on a moss-covered boulder and waited the coming of the sun. With marvellous swiftness, it seemed to me, the light in the east passed into the radiance of early morning, and when the wind awoke and began to whisper in the tree-tops, the first rays of the risen sun fell between the trunks and rested in a circle of gold at our feet. "Now, come with me," whispered my companion in the same deep voice, "for time has no existence here, and that which I would show you is already there." We trod gently and silently over the soft pine needles. Already the sun was high over our heads, and the shadows of the trees coiled closely about their feet. The wood became denser again, but occasionally we passed through little open bits where we could smell the hot sunshine and the dry baked pine needles. Then, presently, we came to the edge of the grove, and I saw a hayfield lying in the blaze of day, and 2 horses basking lazily with switching tails in the shafts of a laden hay wagon. So complete and vivid was the sense of reality that I remember the grateful realization of the cool shade where we sat and looked out upon the hot world beyond. The last pitchfork had tossed up its fragrant burden, and the great horses were already straining in the shafts after the driver as he walked slowly in front with one hand upon their bridles. He was a stalwart fellow, with sunburned neck and hands. Then, for the first time, I noticed, perched aloft upon the trembling throne of hay, the figure of a slim young girl, I could not see her face, but her brown hair escaped in disorder from a white sunbonnet, and her still browner hands held a well-worn hay-rake. She was laughing and talking with the driver, and he, from time to time, cast up at her ardent glances of admiration, glances that won instant smiles and soft blushes in response. The cart presently turned into the roadway that skirted the edge of the wood where we were sitting. I watched the scene with intense interest, and became so much absorbed in it that I quite forgot the manifold, strange steps by which I was permitted to become a spectator. "Come down and walk with me," cried the young fellow, stopping a moment in front of the horses and opening wide his arms. "Jump and I'll catch you." "Oh!" She laughed, and her voice sounded to me as the happiest, merriest laughter I had ever heard from a girl's throat. "That's all very well, but remember I'm queen of the hay, and I must ride." "Then I must come and ride beside you," he cried, and began at once to climb up by way of the driver's seat. But with a peal of silvery laughter, she slipped down easily over the back of the hay to escape him, and ran a little way along the road. I could see her quite clearly, and noticed the charming natural grace of her movements, and the loving expression in her eyes as she looked over her shoulder to make sure he was following. Evidently she did not wish to escape for long, certainly not forever. In 2 strides the big brown swain was after her, leaving the horses to do as they pleased. Another second and his arms would have caught the slender waist and pressed the little body to his heart. But just at that instant, the old man beside me uttered a peculiar cry. It was low and thrilling, and it went through me like a sharp sword. He had called her by her own name, and she had heard. For a second she halted, glancing back with frightened eyes. Then, with a brief cry of despair, the girl swerved aside and dived in swiftly among the shadows of the trees. But the young man saw the sudden movement and cried out to her passionately, "Not that way, my love! Not that way! It's the wood of the dead!" She threw a laughing glance over her shoulder at him, and the wind caught her hair and drew it out in a brown cloud under the sun. But the next minute she was close beside me, lying on the breast of my companion, and I was certain I heard the words repeatedly uttered with many sighs, "Father, you called, and I have come, and I come willingly, for I am very, very tired." At any rate, so the words sounded to me, and mingled with them I seemed to catch the answer in that deep, thrilling whisper I already knew. "And you shall sleep, my child, sleep for a long, long time, until it is time for you to begin the journey again." In that brief second of time, I had recognized the face and voice of the innkeeper's daughter. But the next minute a dreadful wail broke from the lips of the young man, and the sky grew suddenly as dark as night. The wind rose and began to toss the branches about us, and the whole scene was swallowed up in a wave of utter blackness. Again the chill fingers seemed to seize my hand, and I was guided by the way I had come to the edge of the wood, and crossing the hayfield still slumbering in the starlight, I crept back to the inn and went to bed. A year later I happened to be in the same part of the country, and the memory of the strange summer vision returned to me with the added softness of distance. I went to the old village and had tea under the same orchard trees at the same inn. But the little maid of the inn did not show her face, and I took occasion to inquire of her father as to her welfare and her whereabouts. "Married, no doubt?" I laughed, but with a strange feeling that clutched at my heart. "No, sir," replied the innkeeper sadly. "Not married, though she was just going to be, but dead. She got a sunstroke in the hayfields, just a few days after you were here, if I remember rightly. And she was gone from us in less than a week. The end. Thank you for listening. So yeah, we've had all the emotions tonight. Well, we've had laughter and sadness. Sorrow and joy. Although I wouldn't say the first one's necessarily particularly joyful. Sorrow and annoyance and hypocrisy. I do like the way Blackwood writes. He really does write... Oh, sorry, just dropped my phone. He really does write very poetically. I really, really do like the way he writes. He's very nice indeed. So yes, I hope you enjoyed that. Two little ghost stories for you for spooky season. Sorrow and Schadenfreude. There we go, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, in theory... Sam will be back on Saturday with more Diary of a Nobody. Oh, excuse me. Yawn. Yeah. In theory, he'll be back on Saturday. And then I think I will hopefully, fingers crossed, be back on the Wednesday after that. If not the end of the world. But we will be doing some sort of Halloween stream on Halloween. Some kind of film watch along, I suspect. So keep your eye on the Discord, and we shall update you there. But for now, I think I'm going to throw us over to good old Stephen, because we haven't raided him for a while because I've not been around. So go send Stephen the love, because he's a wonderful person and he's great. And we shall see you all hopefully on Saturday. So thank you all very much indeed for being here. Go take care of yourselves. Feel the spooky cozy season, and we shall see you again very soon. Thank you very much, and good night.